The leak in the basement pipe had been dripping for 3 days, and I finally got around to fixing it on a Tuesday night. Funny how the smallest problems become the biggest revelations. I was tightening the joint when I heard voices upstairs, my daughter Addie and my wife Mira having one of their heart-to-heart conversations. "Dad wouldn't know a real woman if one bit him," Addie said, her voice carrying that casual cruelty only college kids master. "He's just a glorified plumber with a lucky stock tip. Why do you even stay with him, Mom? You and Grandpa built this company. He's just burden." I set down my wrench and listened. 23 years of marriage, and this is what my family really thought of me. Nice to know I'm the family mascot, like a lucky rabbit's foot with calluses. "Your father has his uses," Mira replied, her voice that familiar ice-cold tone she reserved for business calls. "But you're right. Tomorrow's launch dinner will show everyone what Anderson Holdings is really capable of. 50 million in valuation, and we did it without his help." I finished the pipe repair in silence. Corbin Finlor, the glorified plumber. The man who built the electrical contracting business from nothing, who invested smart, who put his wife through law school. Burden. The next evening, I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, watching Mira work the room like she owned it, which, according to the paperwork, she mostly did. Anderson Holdings was her baby, co-founded with her father, Gareth Anderson, 3 years ago. I'd provided the initial funding, $2 million from my business sale, but my name stayed off the incorporation papers at their request. "Keep it clean," Gareth had said back then. "Blue-collar money makes investors nervous." The room buzzed with investors, city council members, and local business elite. Mira wore her power suit like armor, her blonde hair pulled back in that severe style she favored for important meetings. She was presenting the company's expansion plans to a crowd of potential partners. "Anderson Holdings has achieved remarkable growth," she announced from the small stage. "We've secured partnerships with 3 major municipalities and expanded our consulting services across the region. Our current valuation stands at 50 million, with projected growth of 30% annually." Applause filled the room. I sipped my whiskey and watched my wife bask in the attention. Gareth stood beside her, silver-haired and confident, every inch the successful businessman. He'd made his fortune in real estate development before retirement, and Anderson Holdings was his comeback project. After the presentation, I approached them near the bar. "Congratulations," I said. "The numbers look impressive. If you need any additional capital for the expansion, I could—" "We don't need your spare change," Mira interrupted, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "This is a 50 million business, Corbin. We're past the point where your little contributions matter." Gareth chuckled, adjusting his silk tie. "No offense, son, but we're playing in the big leagues now. Your electrical work was fine for getting started, but we need real money. Professional money." The conversation around us continued, but their words echoed in my head. Spare change. Little contributions. I nodded politely, excused myself, and stepped outside onto the hotel's terrace. The night air was cool against my face as I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. David Chen, my investment manager at Pinnacle Financial. We'd worked together for 15 years, ever since I sold my first business. I typed a simple message. "Activate contingency memo Anderson Holdings. Authorization code. Finlor 7739. The message sent with a soft whoosh. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to the party. Most people don't understand how business partnerships really work. They see the handshakes and contracts, but they miss the fine print. When I provided funding for Anderson Holdings, David and I had insisted on certain protections: observer rights at board meetings, approval authority for major partnerships, guarantor status for key supplier relationships. Mira and Gareth had signed everything without reading the details. Why would they? It was just spare change from a glorified plumber. The contingency memo wasn't about cash, it was about leverage. My signature guaranteed credit lines with 6 major suppliers. My investment status triggered governance clauses that required my written consent for strategic decisions. My observer rights included veto power over reputational risk issues. The memo I'd just activated would automatically notify the board chair, corporate counsel, and all guaranteed vendors of my withdrawal from these positions. It included a public recording of tonight's remarks as context for reputational concerns. I was finishing my second whiskey when I noticed Mira's phone buzzing against the bar. She glanced at it, frowned, and stepped away from her conversation with the mayor's wife. "What do you mean, emergency session?" she said into the phone, her voice rising slightly. "Tonight? That's impossible." Gareth joined her, his face clouding as he listened to his own phone. Around the room, other phones began buzzing. Board members, investors, partners, all receiving the same automated notifications. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hotel manager announced, "the Anderson Holdings Board has requested use of the conference room for an urgent meeting. The celebration will continue here." I watched Mira's face cycle through confusion, anger, and something approaching panic. She searched the crowd until her eyes found mine across the room. I raised my glass in a small salute. The rules were clear. Any emergency board session required written consent from all major stakeholders. As guarantor of their key partnerships, I qualified. As observer with veto rights, my approval was mandatory. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. "What did you do?" I typed back. "Withdrew my spare change. Good luck with your big league meeting." 20 minutes later, I watched through the hotel's front windows as Mira, Gareth, and 3 board members huddled around a conference table. Phones pressed to ears, laptops open, papers scattered. The $50 million valuation presentation lay forgotten on the podium behind them. I paid my bar tab and walked to my truck. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. My phone buzzed with more texts, angry messages from Mira, concerned calls from board members, urgent voicemails from corporate counsel. I ignored them all and drove home to my empty house in the suburbs. The same house Mira had called embarrassingly middle class when we'd bought it 15 years ago. The same house she'd refused to renovate because it wasn't worth the investment. In my study, I poured another whiskey and opened my laptop. David had already sent the confirmation. All partnerships suspended pending resolution, supplier credit frozen, governance review initiated. Anderson Holdings' expansion plans were effectively on hold until I provided written consent to proceed. My phone rang. Mira's name appeared on the screen. "You bastard," she said when I answered. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I withdrew my spare change," I replied calmly. "Isn't that what you wanted?" "This is sabotage, corporate interference. I'll have you arrested." "For exercising my legal rights as guarantor. Good luck with that." The line went quiet, except for her breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was different, calculating instead of angry. "What do you want, Corbin? Money? A bigger percentage? Name your price." "I want you to remember this moment," I said. "Every time you think about calling someone burden, remember that burden can sink your ship." I hung up and turned off the phone. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Porch lights glowed in windows, families settling in for the night. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a 50 million empire had just crumbled because of a conversation overheard through a basement ceiling. I finished my whiskey and went to bed. The rumors started before I even had my morning coffee. In a town like ours, big enough for secrets, small enough for gossip, news traveled faster than wildfire. By Thursday morning, everyone knew Anderson Holdings was in crisis mode. I was at Murphy's Diner, reading the business section over eggs and toast, when Eli Branson slid into the booth across from me. Eli and I went way back, high school buddies, best man at each other's weddings, business partners on a few small deals. These days, he ran a struggling car lot on the east side of town. "Heard you really screwed the pooch yesterday," he said, signaling the waitress for coffee. "Mira's telling everyone you sabotaged her company out of spite." "Mira says a lot of things," I replied, not looking up from my paper. "Most of them aren't worth repeating." Eli leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Come on, Corbin. This is me you're talking to. What really happened?" I studied his face, the practiced concern, the eager curiosity. Eli had always been a gossip, but something felt different about his interest. Too intense, too personal. "Nothing happened," I said. "I exercised my legal rights as an investor. If that caused problems, maybe they should have read their contracts more carefully." "Legal rights?" Eli shook his head. "You always were too smart for your own good. But this is going to backfire, you know. Mira's connected. Her father's connected. They'll find ways to hurt you back." "Let them try." I left a 10 on the table and walked out. Through the diner's front window, I watched Eli immediately pull out his phone. Interesting. In 15 minutes, I'd given him nothing useful, but he was reporting back to someone anyway. The rest of the morning brought a parade of phone calls. Suppliers wanting clarification on their contracts, board members demanding explanations, corporate lawyers speaking in careful, measured tones about fiduciary responsibilities and legal exposure. I answered them all with the same response. My investment manager would handle all communications going forward. Any questions about my decision should be directed to Pinnacle Financial. Around noon, my daughter Addie called. "Dad, what the heck is going on?" Her voice carried that particular mix of confusion and accusation that only family can master. "Mom's freaking out. Grandpa's talking about lawyers. Everyone's saying you destroyed the company." "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "I simply withdrew my financial backing. Companies rise and fall on their own merits." "But why? This makes no sense. You've been supporting Mom's business from the beginning." I almost told her. Almost explained about the conversation I'd overheard, about being called burden and a glorified plumber. But Addie was Mira's daughter as much as mine, and in this family, loyalty ran along predictable lines. "Sometimes people show you who they really are," I said instead. "When that happens, you have to decide whether to keep pretending or start responding accordingly." "That's cryptic even for you, Dad. Look, whatever this is about, can't you just fix it? Mom's really upset." "I'm sure she is." After hanging up, I drove across town to Vic's boxing gym. Vic Kowalski had been my coach back in high school, and his gym was one of the few places in town where a man could think without interruption. The old brick building smelled of sweat, leather, and determination, honest smells from honest work. "Heard you've been making waves," Vic said as I wrapped my hands for the heavy bag. He was past 70 now, but still moved like a fighter. "Town's buzzing about Anderson Holdings." "People love drama," I replied, starting my warm-up routine. "Gives them something to talk about besides the weather." "Mira came by yesterday," Vic continued, wiping down equipment. "Looking for you? Seemed pretty worked up." That stopped me mid-punch. "Mira was here?" "Yep, with that Branson fellow and some woman I didn't recognize. Blonde, expensive clothes, talked like a lawyer. They wanted to know about your schedule when you usually come in." I resumed hitting the bag, processing this information. Mira had never set foot in Vic's gym before. She considered it beneath her social status, too working class, too rough around the edges. But yesterday she'd shown up with Eli and a mystery woman, asking about my routines. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing useful." Vic grinned. "Told them you were unpredictable. Sometimes here in the morning, sometimes evening, sometimes not at all. Seemed to frustrate them." I spent an hour working the bags, thinking through the implications. Mira was gathering intelligence, building some kind of strategy. The question was whether she planned to attack my reputation, my business, or something more personal. The answer came that evening when I stopped at Riverside Tavern for dinner. The place was crowded with the usual after-work crowd. City employees, construction workers, small business owners, people I'd known for years. But tonight, conversations stopped when I entered. Heads turned, whispers followed. I took a seat at the bar and ordered a burger and beer. "Rough week?" asked Tommy, the bartender. We'd gone to high school together. "No worse than usual." "Heard different? Heard you're in some kind of war with your wife's company." Before I could respond, a voice called out from across the room. "Hey, Corbin, how's the sabotage business treating you?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. I turned to see Jake Morrison, a local contractor who'd lost several bids to Anderson Holdings over the past year. "Wouldn't know," I replied evenly. "I'm in the investment business." "That what they're calling it now?" Jake stood up, emboldened by alcohol and audience. "I heard you tanked your own wife's company because she wouldn't let you play in the big leagues." More laughter. I sipped my beer and waited. "Must be embarrassing," Jake continued. "Being married to a woman more successful than you. I guess some men can't handle that." The room went quiet. Everyone knew Jake was pushing boundaries, but they also knew he was saying what others were thinking. In a town where reputation mattered, being seen as petty or vindictive could destroy a man's business prospects. I stood up slowly, left money on the bar, and walked toward the door. As I passed Jake's table, I stopped. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "Some men can't handle successful women, but I'm not one of them. I married a woman I thought was successful. Turns out she was just good at spending other people's money." I left before he could respond. Outside, the parking lot was half empty. I was unlocking my truck when footsteps approached from behind. "That was well handled," a woman's voice said. I turned to see the blonde woman Vic had described, expensive clothes, lawyer-bearing, predatory smile. She was older than Mira, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of polished appearance that screamed corporate executive. "Do we know each other?" I asked. "Tina Voss. I'm a friend of your wife's. We need to talk." "No, we don't." I started to get in the truck, but she moved closer, blocking my path. "Actually, we do. See, I know what you're really up to, Corbin. This isn't about business or investments or wounded pride. This is about control. You can't stand that Mira doesn't need you anymore. Lady, I don't know you, and I don't care what you think you know. I know you've been following Mira. I know you've been asking questions about her schedule, her meetings, her personal life. That's stalking, legally speaking." Something cold settled in my stomach. "I haven't been following anyone." "Really?" "Because I have photos that suggest otherwise. Time-stamped photos of your truck outside her office building, outside the restaurant where she had lunch with investors, outside the hotel where she met with potential partners." I stared at her, mind racing. Someone had been following Mira and making it look like me. Someone with access to my schedule, my vehicle information, my routines. "What do you want?" I asked. Tina smiled. "Simple. Drop your opposition to Anderson Holdings, restore the partnerships, release the supplier guarantees, and this all goes away. Keep playing games, and those photos end up with the police." She handed me a business card and walked away, her heels clicking against the asphalt. I watched her get into a black BMW and drive off into the night. The card read, "Tina Voss, Senior Partner, Voss and Associates Human Resources Consulting." I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at that card and thinking about the web being woven around me. Mira, Eli, and now Tina, all working together to pressure me back into line. All convinced they could manipulate me into submission. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Friday morning brought rain and a new level of escalation. I was reviewing supplier contracts in my home office when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a police cruiser in my driveway. Officer Janet Mills stood on my porch, looking uncomfortable. We'd known each other since high school. She'd married my cousin Danny before he shipped out to Afghanistan. "Morning, Corbin. Sorry to bother you, but I need to ask about some complaints we've received. What kind of complaints? Harassment allegations. Someone filed a report claiming you've been following your wife, taking photos, making threats. I invited her inside and poured coffee while she explained. Anonymous tips about my truck being spotted at various locations, witness statements about suspicious behavior, photos allegedly showing me conducting surveillance. The thing is, Janet said, studying her notes, the timeline doesn't make sense. These sightings have you in 3 different places at the same time yesterday. Either you've learned to teleport, or someone's playing games. Someone's definitely playing games. I showed her my phone's location history, my credit card receipts, and the security footage from Vic's gym. For every alleged sighting, I had alibis. Janet took notes and shook her head. Whoever's doing this isn't very good at it, she said. But they're persistent. You might want to be extra careful about documenting your whereabouts for a while. After she left, I called David Chen at Pinnacle Financial. The pressure's increasing, I told him. They're trying to frame me for harassment now. Not surprising, David replied. I've been getting calls from their lawyers all morning. They're threatening lawsuits, regulatory complaints, even criminal charges. Someone's very desperate to get those partnerships restored. How desperate? Desperate enough to offer triple the original investment amount if you'll sign a release and walk away quietly. I considered this. Triple my original investment would set me up for life. I could take the money, move somewhere warm, and let Mira have her empire. Counteroffer, I said. They can have their partnerships back when they publicly acknowledge my contributions to the company's founding and success. Full disclosure in their next investor presentation. That's all? Just acknowledgement? That's all. David was quiet for a moment. Corbin, they'll never agree to that. Acknowledgement implies equality. It undermines their narrative about building this from nothing. Then I guess we're at an impasse. That afternoon, I drove to the industrial district to check on some rental properties I owned. 3 small warehouses, nothing fancy, but they generated steady income from local businesses. I was inspecting a loading dock when Eli Branson's car pulled up. He got out slowly, hands visible, like he was approaching a dangerous animal. We need to talk, he called out. No, we don't. Yes, we do. This has gone far enough, Corbin. You're hurting innocent people. I laughed. Innocent people? That's rich, coming from you. Eli moved closer, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment. Look, I know you're upset about Mira. I know you feel left out. But destroying her company won't fix your marriage. My marriage was over the moment she decided I was burden. The company is just business. It's not just business, Eli exploded. There are employees depending on those contracts, families with mortgages and car payments and college funds. You're playing God with people's lives. Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. The desperation, the personal investment in Anderson Holdings' success. The way he'd been gathering information, reporting back to Mira and Tina. How much do you owe them? I asked. Eli's face went pale. What? Anderson Holdings. How much money do you owe them? Is that why you're so invested in their success? He started to deny it, then stopped. His shoulders sagged in defeat. 200,000, he said quietly. My car lot was failing. Mira offered to help, a private loan through Anderson Holdings. But if the company goes under, you lose everything. Everything. The lot, my house, my kids' college funds. Mira said she'd call the loan if you don't restore the partnerships. I felt a mix of anger and pity. Eli wasn't just Mira's ally, he was her hostage. She'd used his desperation to buy his loyalty, then deployed him as a weapon against me. When did the loan happen? I asked. 6 months ago, right after you refused to invest more money in the expansion. The timeline clicked into place. Mira had asked for additional funding, I'd declined pending a business plan review, and she'd immediately found another source. My source. Money from a company I'd helped capitalize, loaned to my best friend without my knowledge. Did you know? I asked. When you took the money, did you know it came from my investment? Eli couldn't meet my eyes. I suspected. But I was desperate, Corbin. The lot was 3 months from bankruptcy. My kids were talking about dropping out of college to help with expenses. When Mira offered a solution, you took it. I took it. We stood in silence for a moment, two middle-aged men facing the wreckage of a friendship destroyed by financial desperation and manipulation. I can't help you, I said finally. Even if I wanted to restore those partnerships, it wouldn't matter now. Too many people know about the governance issues. The board would demand a full audit before proceeding. Then we're all screwed. No, you're screwed. Mira and Gareth will find other funding sources. They always do. But you'll lose everything because you trusted the wrong people. Eli got back in his car without another word. I watched him drive away, feeling something I hadn't expected, sympathy. He'd been played as thoroughly as I had, just with different stakes. That evening, I was having dinner at home when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. Time to end this. The email contained a single attachment, a video file labeled Corbin Finlor Evidence.mp4. I opened it with growing dread. The video showed a man who looked like me sitting in a truck outside Anderson Holdings' office building. The figure was partially obscured by shadows and distance, but the truck was definitely mine. Same model, same color, same license plate. Except I'd never been to that location on the date shown in the timestamp. I called David immediately. They've escalated to fabricated evidence, I told him. Professional quality surveillance video that puts me somewhere I've never been. How professional? Professional enough to fool a jury if it gets that far. David was quiet for a long moment. Corbin, maybe it's time to consider their offer. Take the money and walk away. This is getting dangerous. No, they want to play dirty? Let's see how dirty they're willing to get. I hung up and opened my laptop. If Mira wanted to wage war with fabricated evidence and financial manipulation, she was about to discover that two could play that game. I started by researching Tina Voss and her consulting company. Public records, business filings, client lists, professional associations. What I found was interesting. Voss and Associates had been involved in 3 major corporate takeovers in the past 5 years, always representing the acquiring party, always specializing in reputation management and executive transition services. Translation: corporate hit woman. Next, I dug into Anderson Holdings' recent financial filings. The $50 million valuation Mira had touted was based on projected revenues from contracts that hadn't been signed yet. The actual current value was closer to $12 million, and that included my original investment. But the most interesting discovery was buried in the supplier agreements. The governance clauses I'd insisted on weren't just about my observer rights. They also included automatic termination triggers if the company engaged in fraudulent practices or misrepresented its financial status. Mira's public claims about the $50 million valuation, combined with the fabricated evidence against me, might constitute exactly the kind of fraudulent practices those clauses were designed to prevent. I smiled and reached for my phone. Time to activate a few more contingency plans. Saturday morning, I sent 3 carefully crafted emails. The first went to the Anderson Holdings Board of Directors, copied to corporate counsel and the SEC. It included documentation of the company's misrepresented valuation, evidence of fabricated harassment claims, and a formal request for an independent audit of all financial statements and business practices. The second went to Tina Voss, with copies to her professional licensing board and the Better Business Bureau. It contained a detailed complaint about unethical business practices, including evidence of her involvement in fabricating surveillance footage and coordinating harassment campaigns. The third went to Mira directly. Conference room at Riverside Hotel, 2 p.m. today. Come alone or the local news gets copies of everything. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Lawyers, board members, corporate executives, all demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, promising consequences. I ignored them all and drove to the hotel. The conference room was the same one where Anderson Holdings' emergency board meeting had collapsed 3 days earlier. Fitting venue for what I hoped would be the final act of this drama. Mira arrived at exactly 2 p.m., but she wasn't alone. Gareth and Tina flanked her like bodyguards, their faces grim with determination. "You said come alone," Mira said, as they took seats across from me. "I said a lot of things. You haven't been listening." Gareth leaned forward, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the circumstances. "Let's cut through the dramatics, Corbin. What's your price? What will it take to make this go away?" "Nothing you're willing to pay?" "Try us," Tina interjected. "We're prepared to be very generous." I opened my laptop and turned it toward them. The screen showed a detailed financial analysis of Anderson Holdings. Real numbers, not the inflated projections they'd been selling to investors. "Your company is worth $12 million, not 50, I said. "Your expansion plans are based on contracts you don't have with clients who haven't committed. Your entire business model is a house of cards held together by my guarantees and supplier relationships." Mira's face flushed red. "That's not true. We have confirmed interest from—" "You have letters of intent, non-binding expressions of possible future consideration. In the real world, that's called wishful thinking." Gareth studied the screen, his expression shifting from anger to concern. "Where did you get this information?" "Public records, SEC filings, supplier contracts. Amazing what you can learn when you actually read the documents instead of just signing them." I clicked to the next slide, which showed the fabricated surveillance footage alongside my actual location data for the same time period. "Someone went to considerable trouble to frame me for harassment," I continued. "Professional quality video editing, coordinated witness statements, even fake license plates. That level of sophistication doesn't come cheap." Tina's face had gone pale. "You can't prove we had anything to do with—" "I can prove you were present at every location where witnesses claim to see me. I can prove your consulting company specializes in exactly this kind of reputation destruction. And I can prove that Anderson Holdings paid your firm $200,000 last month for crisis management services." The room went silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, closing the laptop. "Anderson Holdings will issue a public statement acknowledging that its previous valuation claims were premature and based on preliminary projections. The company will undergo an independent financial audit, and all harassment claims against me will be withdrawn." "And if we refuse?" Gareth asked. "Then Monday morning, every major news outlet in the state gets copies of everything. The fabricated evidence, the financial misrepresentations, the coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation. I'm sure the business community would find it very educational." Mira finally spoke, her voice barely controlled. "You're destroying us. 20 years of marriage, and you're willing to destroy everything we built together." "We didn't build anything together," I replied. "I provided funding, you provided ambition, and your father provided connections. But the moment you decided I was burden, our partnership ended." "This is about ego," she continued. "You can't stand that I succeeded without you." "No, this is about respect, something you never learned to show." I stood up and gathered my papers. "You have until Monday morning to decide. Public acknowledgement and independent audit, or public humiliation and federal investigation." "Wait," Tina said as I reached the door. "There has to be another solution, something we can work out." I turned back to face them. There was. 3 days ago, you could have simply said thank you when I offered to help. You could have acknowledged that my contributions mattered. Instead, you chose to call it spare change and laugh at my expense. "We didn't mean," Mira started. "You meant every word, and now you're facing the consequences." I left them in the conference room and walked through the hotel lobby. Outside, the afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the parking lot. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Board meeting called for tomorrow morning. They're going to try to remove you from all agreements. I typed back, let them try, make sure you record everything. Sunday evening, I was grilling a steak on my back patio when Addie's car pulled into the driveway. She came through the back gate, looking tired and confused. Dad, what's happening? Mom's been crying for 2 days. Grandpa's talking about bankruptcy. Everyone's saying you're trying to destroy the family. I handed her a beer and gestured to the patio chair beside mine. Your mother and grandfather made some poor business decisions. Now they're dealing with the consequences. But why won't you help them? You've always helped before. Because they made it clear they don't want my help. They want my money, but not my involvement. There's a difference. Addie was quiet for a moment, picking at the label on her beer bottle. Is it true what Mom said? About you following her around? Taking pictures? No. Someone else was doing that and making it look like me. Why would someone do that? To pressure me into giving them what they want. When people get desperate, they do desperate things. Are you and Mom getting divorced? The question hung in the air between us. I'd been avoiding thinking about it, focusing instead on the business warfare and reputation battles, but the truth was unavoidable. Probably, I said. Some things can't be fixed once they're broken. Addie started crying then, not the dramatic tears of a teenager, but the quiet sobs of a young woman watching her family disintegrate. I put my arm around her shoulders and let her cry. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, I said. None of this is your fault. I said those things about you, she whispered. That night before the dinner. I called you burden and said Mom should leave you. I know. I heard. I didn't mean it. I was just trying to sound sophisticated, like I understood business. I'm so sorry, Dad. Apology accepted, but your mother did mean it. That's the difference. We sat in silence as the sun set behind the trees. Tomorrow would bring the board meeting, the final confrontation, and whatever consequences followed. But tonight, I had my daughter back, and that felt like a victory worth savoring. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I drove downtown to the Anderson Holdings offices. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., and I intended to be there early. David met me in the parking lot, carrying a briefcase full of documents and recording equipment. They're planning to vote you out of all agreements, he said, as we walked toward the building. Complete severance of the partnership, forfeiture of observer rights, release of all guarantees. Can they do that legally? They can try. But the original contracts require unanimous consent for major changes, and you're considered a major stakeholder. They need your signature to remove you. Which they're not getting. The Anderson Holdings offices occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, all glass walls and expensive furniture designed to impress clients and intimidate competitors. Mira had spared no expense creating the perfect corporate environment. The boardroom was already full when we arrived. Gareth sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 other board members I recognized from the launch dinner. Mira occupied the seat to his right, her face composed, but her hands trembling slightly as she shuffled papers. Tina Voss stood near the windows, talking quietly into her phone. She ended the call when she saw me enter. Gentlemen, Gareth said without preamble, let's begin. We're here to address the current crisis facing Anderson Holdings and determine the best path forward. The best path forward, I replied, taking my seat, is honesty. Something this company seems to have forgotten. One of the board members, Patricia Wells, a local bank president, cleared her throat. Mr. Finlor, we appreciate your past contributions to the company, but recent events have made your continued involvement untenable. What recent events? My exercise of legal rights? My refusal to be called burden in public? Your harassment campaign against company executives? Tina interjected. Your deliberate sabotage of business relationships, your threats against the company's reputation and financial stability. I smiled and nodded to David, who opened his briefcase and removed a stack of documents. Harassment campaign? I said. You mean the fabricated surveillance footage your company produced? The fake witness statements? The coordinated effort to frame me for crimes I didn't commit? David distributed copies of our evidence to each board member. Time-stamped location data, financial records showing payments to Tina's consulting firm, analysis of the doctored video footage. Patricia Wells studied the documents, her expression growing darker by the page. Ms. Voss, can you explain these payments from Anderson Holdings to your consulting firm? Crisis management services, Tina replied smoothly. Standard corporate reputation protection. Standard? I laughed. Fabricating evidence is standard? Coordinating false police reports is standard? What other standard services has your firm provided? Gareth tried to regain control of the meeting. Regardless of these allegations, the fact remains that Mr. Finlor's actions have damaged the company's ability to operate effectively. We need to move forward without his involvement. Fine, I said, but moving forward means acknowledging the truth about this company's actual financial position. I nodded to David again, who activated the room's presentation screen. Our financial analysis appeared in stark detail. Real revenues, actual contract values, honest projections based on confirmed commitments rather than wishful thinking. Anderson Holdings is worth $12 million, I announced, not $50 million. The expansion plans are based on contracts that don't exist. The entire business model is fraudulent. That's not true, Mira finally spoke, her composure cracking. We have confirmed interest from multiple clients. The projections are conservative estimates based on letters of intent, I interrupted. Non-binding expressions of possible future consideration. In other words, worthless paper. Patricia Wells was taking notes, her banker's instincts clearly troubled by what she was seeing. These numbers are significantly different from what we were presented during the funding discussions. Because those presentations were lies, I said. Designed to inflate the company's value and attract investors who wouldn't have committed money based on the real numbers. The room erupted in angry voices, board members demanding explanations, Gareth insisting the projections were reasonable, Mira claiming I was distorting the data out of spite. I stood up and waited for quiet. Here's what's going to happen, I said when the voices died down. Anderson Holdings will issue a public correction of its valuation claims. The company will undergo an independent audit by a firm chosen by the board, not by management. All harassment claims against me will be withdrawn and publicly retracted. And if we refuse? Gareth asked. Then this afternoon, every business reporter in the state gets copies of everything we've discussed today. The fabricated evidence, the financial misrepresentations, the coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation. I'm sure the SEC would also find it interesting reading. Tina stepped forward, her professional mask finally slipping. You're bluffing. You wouldn't destroy your own wife's company. Watch me. I gathered my papers and headed for the door. You have until 5 p.m. to decide. Public acknowledgement and independent audit or public humiliation and federal investigation. Corbin, wait, Mira called out. Please, can we talk privately? I stopped at the door but didn't turn around. We had 20 years to talk privately. You chose to have this conversation in public instead. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry about what I said at the dinner. I'm sorry about calling your contributions spare change. I was trying to impress investors, and I said things I didn't mean. No, I replied, finally turning to face her. You said exactly what you meant. The only thing you're sorry about is getting caught. I left them in the boardroom and walked to the elevator. Through the glass walls, I could see them huddled around the conference table, phones out, voices raised in urgent discussion. The elevator doors closed, and I descended toward the lobby. My phone was already buzzing with calls and texts, reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story, lawyers offering their services, business associates wanting to know if the rumors were true. I ignored them all and drove home. That afternoon, I sat in my study with a glass of whiskey and waited. At 4:47 p.m., my phone rang. Patricia Wells's name appeared on the screen. Mr. Finlor, we've reached a decision. Anderson Holdings will issue a public statement acknowledging that previous valuation claims were preliminary and subject to revision. We'll engage an independent auditing firm to review all financial statements and business projections, and all harassment allegations against you will be formally withdrawn. And my partnership agreements? Remain in effect with full observer rights and veto authority over major decisions. Thank you, Patricia. I think this is the beginning of a much more honest relationship. After hanging up, I poured another whiskey and walked onto my back patio. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. You won. I hope you're satisfied. I typed back, I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing. The house felt different now, quieter, but also more peaceful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, divorce proceedings, and the complex work of rebuilding relationships with my daughter and the business community. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The Anderson Holdings crisis would make headlines for weeks. The independent audit would reveal even more financial irregularities than I'd suspected. Tina Voss would lose her professional license and face criminal charges for evidence fabrication. Gareth would retire in disgrace, his reputation in ruins. And Mira? She would survive, as people like her always do, diminished, chastened, but still standing, still convinced that she was the victim in all of this. But that was her problem now, not mine. I finished my whiskey and went inside to start planning my next move. After all, I had a company to rebuild, this time with partners who understood the difference between spare change and the foundation that holds everything together. The war was over. The real work was just beginning.